This is the Get a Life podcast. Ex-Cult Conversations.
Hi, Jeremy. Hi, Anne. Welcome to the Get a Life podcast. Jeremy, as you're aware, we are ex-members of the exclusive Brethren / PBCC, which is apparently a mainstream Christian church, but I call it a cult. Unfortunately, sexual abuse is at a kind of epidemic level inside of this cult, in my opinion. And I've been following you on social media and watching you progress and do all these amazing things, going into schools, working with teenagers and bringing awareness about sexual abuse to the forefront of people's minds. So I would just like you to tell your story of how you came into doing this and all about your organisation to start off with, please.
Amazing. So my name is Jeremy Indika and I run a platform called Something to Say, along with my own platform, my personal platform, Jeremy Indika as well. And I came about to do all of this work because I started reflecting on the sexual abuse that I went through when I was a child. Now, I started doing that in my mid-20s. The sexual abuse was going on between the ages of 8 and 10. So it was some time after that I really started thinking about it seriously. And as I started looking back at that and thinking about like, oh my goodness, how did that even happen? How did nobody notice? How was I showing no signs? How come it's taken me this long to really deeply think about it? I started just doing some research online, looking into things. I then started sharing my story with friends. I then started sharing my story online. And then one thing led to another with social media. It started to build. I then left my career as a mechanical engineer to pursue this entirely. And now there's quite the audience following all of this work. I'm now reaching parents, professionals, teenagers, and even some parents that are telling me that they're showing their young children some of my videos that are suitable for their age group just because they are seeing the importance of open conversations. Of course, there's no getting away from the sexual abuse that I went through at such a young age being such a sad thing. It was by another man, somebody who was trusted by the family, and he had access to me and really went for it and did the grooming process very skillfully, I would say, so that I didn't tell anybody, and really that I didn't even recognize how wrong what I was involved in was. And my mission, shall we say, or my pursuit, or why I've dedicated my life to doing this work is because I would like to try to help reduce the amount of times this is going on now and into the future of future generations, and raise the awareness so that we can try to prevent this from happening in its magnitude.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank you so much for dedicating your life to this, because I don't know of many people that do, if any, actually. I am I'm basically a foghorn about sexual abuse. So I kind of follow in your footsteps, but quite far behind. If you went into, say, school that belongs to a minority or a sect or like a church school, do you think you'd be able to even get into these schools? And if so, how would you go about educating these children that are in such a closed community?
So with regards to getting into schools, it's been this year that I've managed to break through into those circles. And I was knocking on schools' doors for at least 2 years, trying to tell them that I've got a story that I just want to tell the young people. It's about X, Y, Z, and it would just be really inspiring. I think it would do some great things for those children to hear this. But nobody wanted to bring me in. I think there's so much fear around this topic, and coming away from the curriculum in any way is very fearful. You may trigger somebody, you may say something that may upset somebody. What will the parents say? All of these complications. So I have never managed to get into the smaller circles of the schooling organizations like what you mentioned. And I think I would find some difficulty in doing that. Schools like to protect what they teach and not push the boundaries, but also that's because they are heavily regulated. And if they make one wrong move, or what can be considered as a wrong move from their governors or their trustees, then they're in big trouble. So even some of the teachers that want to bring me in because they follow me on social media themselves, and they're like, oh, you'd be such an inspiration for our students, even they can't bring me in. You know, I've got one lady trying to book me, and the earliest that their school will find me a slot is April next year. And she's trying to tell the teachers, the other teachers that call the shots, like, no, we need to get him in now.
Yeah.
Like this is urgent, but nobody's really seeing that so much as we are seeing that because we have experienced it ourselves or we see it firsthand. How would I go about reaching those children or connecting with those children? That's just as tough a question, because when I started putting together a presentation for the younger ages, I was very cautious and wary to not create something that has a classroom feel to it, that they're going to be bored by. I don't want a room full of 15-year-olds thinking, cool, when is this guy going to finish so we can get out of here? Right? That's not what I'm after. And I remember at school often feeling like that. I want them to be like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. I want to know more, and not be thinking about the time. And that's why I've gone about telling my story. So I say to the schools, I'm not a teacher. This isn't a lecture. I'm a speaker. And I've come to tell your students about a real lived experience. Now, what I have also done is I've attempted to inject some inspiration and empowerment in the story too. So like I was a mechanical engineer before I did this. I worked in aerospace. I worked in supercars. I used to work for a company called McLaren, which are a very prolific car manufacturer, designing their supercars. So I had this high flying career before I decided to quit that and do this. So I tell the kids about that as well. I weave that into the conversation. So like, you know, when the memories come back, I'm 25 and I'm like out partying and I'm loving life and I'm getting paid well and I'm out with my mates. So I try to create a balanced story, and it's really working. I mean, you should see them. Even let's just take an age group as an example. Let's take year 11s. You know, they're 15 going on 16, and let's take a mixed school, boys and girls. And when I start talking, some are taking it seriously. I've got some attention, some are looking the other way, but there are some in particular, it's always groups of lads. One of them's cracked a quick joke with their mates and they've all started laughing and sniggering. Like, I remember what it used to be like at that age, you know, always trying to make your mates laugh and trying to turn everything into a joke. Now, as I continue telling the story, I start with the abuse. They're still going. And then I start talking about the memories coming back. Then I start talking about my engineering career. And I see a few of them pop up because I start talking about my chasing Formula One. And a few of the lads are interested in that. But then I start talking about the pursuit of the man that did this to me, trying to prosecute him, going and knocking on his door. And all of a sudden, I've got their attention. And now I've got them gripped into this subject and they're interested in hearing about it. And yes, that may not be a lesson, but there's so much empowerment and inspiration for them to walk away from. And at the very least, I've given them a lot to think about and I've got them taking this subject seriously. And I think that's a win.
It is a win. Absolutely. Do you think that any children have come out since you've educated them as being abused?
So no children have approached me personally. However, I have had 3 or 4 students write to me afterwards. So they've gone on social media, found me, and to write to me and say, yesterday was phenomenal. That was so interesting. Good on you. I wish you all the best. So they're really engrossed in what I was saying, you know, for them to go out of their way and find me afterwards.
Yeah.
One of the schools that I last spoke at actually did some kind of feedback session with the students. The teacher, the PSHE teacher, extremely proactive. The week after I spoke, she got the whole year group together and they discussed what I discussed. And I thought that was brilliant proactiveness from the school. And she said everybody was hooked. Everybody was putting their hand up, wanting to say their bit. And I'm like, oh, come on, this is great. Instead of it being something that they feel is mundane or another lecture. And I feel that's phenomenal. So I know such great things is coming from it.
Yeah. And a taboo subject as well, when you've got that kind of response, it's nuts.
Yes. And I talk about this actually during my presentation when I speak to adults, because I also speak to teachers. I just went and spoke at primary school to the teachers, and we actually had a quick discussion on the taboo of this topic. And as a team that I feel like we are every time I present this, in particular with the teachers, because we all have the same goal. We all have the same mission to keep the children safe. We were trying to think of a more taboo topic, and we couldn't. We actually couldn't. You know, we threw a few ideas out there, but we were like, no, this is the number one. And it's so crazy. The thing that everybody doesn't want to happen, yet it's so taboo, nobody wants to talk about it. And like logically, nothing gets sorted out unless we actually talk about it. So it's like an uphill battle.
A lot of people don't want to believe it's happening, do they?
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. And then on top of that, those being abused feel it's some fault of their own, as you would.
Yeah.
We would know. You know?
Yeah.
And so then you don't want to talk about it.
And the taboo for a society, a taboo brings, as far as my knowledge or my observation goes, a taboo brings a shame around the conversation, right? A taboo brings an awkwardness around a conversation. So if you're somebody that's been through that experience, you've basically got no chance of feeling comfortable talking about it, because society already feel awkward about it, let alone the discomfort that you feel about coming out for the first time. It's like, oh my goodness, we are in the Stone Ages with this conversation.
Yeah,
we are in the Stone Age with this conversation. And
you're talking about it from, I'm going to say, a normal world of not being in a cult.
Right.
So imagine it in a cult.
Yeah.
Next level.
I mean, talking about sex is taboo.
Okay.
Yeah. Even the word sex.
Yes.
The word sex. It's just taboo. It's all, and we were taught that's all to do with the flesh, and you know, not
you
to
cut off the flesh
things, and you cut off the flesh, and so it's sin basically, a lot of it. You were allowed that in a marriage, but that was, you know, you weren't allowed to talk about it, and it was so one-sided. Well, for me, it was certainly so one-sided in my marriage. It wasn't anything of love.
And I do wonder about the history, like in human progression. I'm talking like, what was it like 1,000 years? What was it like 2,000 years? I'm just so interested to understand. Has sex always been this taboo, or are certain cultures and communities more progressive than others? Because my parents are from Sri Lanka, and I have a basic understanding of that culture. And I mean, sex is something you do not talk about openly. It's not discussed anywhere, and anything that happens with sex that could be shameful, don't talk about that, because you're going to bring shame to the family. Keep everything hidden. We look good to everybody on the outside, and it's very crazy. I like to think that the culture that I've just mentioned from Sri Lanka, I think that's just starting to change. So I'm wondering, with the cult that you were in, do you think that's starting to change? Do you think the younger generations are starting to break the boundaries?
In maybe a warped way. I mean, I think that it's created really, how do I put this? Okay, just use my ex-husband, for example. Yeah, I don't excuse his behavior. To me, the sexual abuse and everything that he put me through. But I feel the system is creating those type of people because they're not even allowed to have dating. They're not even allowed to have PE together as boys and girls. They're not even allowed, well, certainly in the school where my kids were, they weren't even allowed their lockers to be together. So the only time they were allowed together was in the classroom. And it then creates these people, especially, I'm not saying it's just the boys because it's in the girls too, but it creates these people that have got such a warped view of what sex is that they almost go to another extreme. And like, I feel, any of them, if they're wanting to watch YouTube, they'll somehow get round things to watch YouTube. And when I came out, I discovered that that isn't the sort of stuff that they're looking at is quite extreme, because they think that that's normal, because they don't know what normal is, and I think that it's created these monsters.
Yep.
And
there's a lot of
that have abused, the person that abused you, Abby. I'm not excusing their behaviour, but I think the system has got so much to answer for.
I agree.
I think that there's so many children that abuse children in there, and there are 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old lads that have been convicted for like the most horrendous child pornography convictions. And that's what that system is breeding. And then all of a sudden you're thrown into marriage, because the problems are never dealt with. All of a sudden you're thrown into marriage and you're meant to just all of a sudden be able to have sex with your wife. And there's actually no education on how to do it at all. Like, at all.
A little book from my mom. A little book from my mom.
Did you? Oh, you're lucky.
Before I got married.
No, like my husband had no education whatsoever. No. And so many people that I speak to, like, I remember a lot of my friends, they were like, the bed on the first night was just a bloodbath.
Wow.
Yeah.
And like, to me, that's rape.
Oh, I mean, really, I didn't understand the term marital rape until probably a few years after I left. And I mean, there was definitely one incident where it was more abusive than others. But when I look back now, there was so many times. But like I say, these people almost become sex addicts because they're suppressed at a teenage, and then they're put into this marriage and they just abuse it because they don't know how to use it properly, if you like. And it's how do we get to the root of this problem?
And I think this is an issue across the board, because when you talk about pornography, boys in particular are consuming so much content of various categories, of various extremities, and seeking thrills naturally, clicking on videos. The algorithm is keeping them hooked, and they're getting to 16, let's say, at the legal age to have sex in this country, and they've been watching porn for 3 years and hours of it, right? Because as soon as they hit puberty, they are on their phone. That's for sure. There's no age restrictions on these sites. So you think a 13-year-old lad definitely earlier, I would say statistics would show us that they're watching pornography. But let's say hormones are racing, testosterone is racing. And like me and my mates, we don't joke about it, but we talk in jest, and we're like, thank goodness pornography on mobile phones was not around when we were kids, because we would, like, I take me personally, I would have been on it constantly. Because as a young boy, myself, talking about it from my life experience, I was horny all the time. You're 13, 14, your hormones are racing. So you get to 16 and you've been watching extreme, you may have not watched extreme porn all the time, but you've definitely clicked on the videos. And, you know, I had somebody on my podcast come and talk about this, and they were talking about in sexual environments, you're naturally seeking the next thrill. It's like you're wired like that. You're seeking the next level of thrill. And that's why pornography takes you down roads that you wouldn't usually have gone down. So yes, this is a problem. And I have said before that it's great because when I go into these schools, I'm definitely talking to at least one person that's currently in a sexual abuse situation that they're keeping behind closed doors, right? Every time I go into a school, I'm speaking to at least one teenager, one underage teenager that's currently being sexually abused right now and not saying anything about it. But I'm also speaking to at least one person who's going to turn into an abuser when they get older, or even an abuser now. And that's the bit like, that side of it we don't really think about, right? No. We don't think about the fact that when I talk to a classroom of 100 kids, there's a paedophile in there. There's an abuser in there. They just don't know it yet. So it's all good me going around speaking at schools about abuse prevention, how to speak out. I think that's fantastic. I think that work is phenomenal that I'm doing, but also I need to have an element in my presentation, which I'm still trying to work out how to get that in there. It's just like, watch yourself, watch your sexual behavior, right? Because before you know it, you could be out of control, right? So it's like we need, if we're going to have a serious conversation about sexual abuse prevention with minors, we can't only talk about the victim side. We have to talk about the perpetrator side as well. And that's the conversation that, in my experience online, nobody wants to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I suppose in where we came from, Abi, the fact that they're not even allowed to, well, just to put the word out there, they're not even allowed to masturbate.
No.
So it builds up this frustration even more, and again, I'll say it produces these crazy humans.
But I think in our cult, or our ex-cult, part of the problem comes from the people higher up. So in my story, I reported my abuse to the police, which was a massive decision for me because I had in every conversation, don't go to the police. And then I was offered £50,000 to make them drop the court case. Wow. by high up people in the cult, and they are sweeping the perpetrators' shite straight under that carpet, covering it all up like it's never happened. And in my locality, where I was from, that is still happening to this day. And I pray every day that it will change. But it comes from the people that aren't necessarily perpetrators that are covering up the abuse. They're also part of the problem.
But that is because they're aware of the problem and they don't want that problem to be public.
Yeah.
They know that why it's happening. But it's just a question of how to get to the root of this problem that's so everywhere.
Yeah.
And why is it that people are covering up this crime? So we talk about your ex-cult, but then we can also talk about things like what I keep seeing on the news at the moment about football clubs. And there is a lot of conversations going around that football clubs are trying to keep all of this quiet because it's getting out of hand. All of these historic cases are coming forward. Why is it that people do want to keep this quiet? Is it because it's so shameful or horrific or brings such a this particular crime brings such a bad light on whatever the organization is? It makes it look dirty. It makes it look deviant. And so that's one of the reasons why this is always brushed under the carpet. And we can talk about the big organizations, but we can also just talk about the family structure. I mean, how many people were told by their mum and dad, so unfortunately, we don't talk about that round here, or let's keep that quiet. Let's just push that to the side and move on. I know he used to do those kind of things, but don't worry about it. It's like it's the crime brings like this shame that is very complex.
Yeah, I was told by my granny that I had my part in the abuse. So that's like, I don't think the perpetrator just abused me. He also manipulated the whole family to believe that, which I think is disgusting. But
that's a common story, isn't it, where the person who's carrying out the abuse has also manipulated everyone around that child. They need to do that, I suppose. They need to do that to get access to that child, number one. The
cult used to say that they protect the testimony, Anne. They do it to protect the testimony.
Those are the words they use,
yeah. But surely it would be better to bring it out, deal with it properly, to protect the testimony. Do you know what I mean, Anne?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It's actually, they're actually doing the reverse in what they're doing. They're not protecting anything. They're just making people like ourselves realize more and more how wrong the system is.
But is that because in their mind, their order of priority, the victim is not on that, even on the list?
No.
Protecting what the organization or cult looks like to the outside world, or the people within it even, is the number one priority. So that means that the victim gets pushed to the side.
So what would be your opinion on how abuse in these cults should be dealt with? Do you have any inkling of how it should be? Or
I mean, I wish that priority order was different. I wish children or young people were number one priority on everybody's list. And therefore, if they've suffered something traumatic, and we know that this is traumatic, we know that this is not just a memory, this is not just an experience, this is affecting the way the brain develops from that moment on. So actually experiencing sexual abuse as a minor when you haven't fully developed yet is going to actually redirect your life projection. So it's like a serious thing. And I would love for young people well-being to be more of a priority. But even in the outside of these organizations and cults, I don't think it is that way either. What did I just see? I just saw somebody just sent it to me on WhatsApp. Somebody got 18 months for abusing two underage girls. It's like 18 months in jail. They're not even going to serve that. I mean, it's disrespectful at the very, very least. And it's a indication that this crime is not taken seriously at all.
Yeah. And I think where there's money, there's power. And this particular cult that we were a part of has billion, like they're just stupidly wealthy. And like the brethren, I know in my case paid for the perpetrators' legal fees, and I know in another case they paid for this other guy's legal fees. And they're using Queen's coroner lawyers or barristers or whatever they are, and you're thinking that they cost 120 grand upwards. Like the base rate is 120 grand. Like, it just blows my mind.
It feels sometimes like there's no winning this battle.
No.
And I feel that sometimes as well. I recently got demonetized on YouTube. They completely cut my revenue from views. And the reasoning was because they deemed my content as sexual explicit content because I talk about sex and minors. And that's the way that they see it. Obviously, that is a computer system analyzing that, but it's a very sophisticated computer system. Like the algorithms and everything are just mind-blowingly sophisticated. So it's a good enough thing to be analyzing channels, but they analyze my channels as explicit sexual content. Therefore, it's unsuitable for them to put adverts on. Therefore, they cannot pay me for views like they pay every other YouTube channel. And it's like, when that came through, I appealed it, and when the final decision came through, I've like got my head in my hands, thinking, "Oh my goodness!" Like it's not just obstacle after obstacle; it's like brick wall after brick wall. You know, and again, my channel is clearly trying to open conversations, and my channel is clearly has an educational information element to it. You know, and then I start coming across other videos on YouTube and I'm like, oh my God, like I come across TikTok videos as well. And my experience on social media is going to be very different to your experience because of our gender, right? So when I open TikTok up, even though I haven't watched any of those videos, I'm going to get a girl in very revealing clothing looking very, very hot because they know I'm a 37-year-old man and that is going to catch my attention.
Yeah, it's the same on my husband's phone and like even Instagram. I'm like, Bruce, have you actually been looking at all this? He's like, no. Instagram just thinks that's what I want to look at.
Oh my God, it was yesterday. I opened up my TikTok and there was the most beautiful looking girl, but she was in a bra and the skimpiest knickers. And she went, watch this stretch, and leant back on her chair, lifted both her legs up. And I'm like, my goodness. And you're demonetizing my platform. And that doesn't help my views either. I think if you're demonetized, it's definitely not going to spread your content like they usually would. But yeah, it's like brick walls, you know.
And those girls, if they're doing that kind of thing, they've probably been abused too.
There's definitely a correlation there as well. But I mean, what's it doing to the young boys? Right? Because the young boys are watching that. And then their newsfeed changes to just girls. And then they start to become like, have this predatory like kind of vibe, hypersexualized, deviant, and then they're 19 and they're like the character that they just wouldn't have been if all of that content wasn't shoved in their face. So it's like craziness, but you just always got to remember, who did you need when you were a child? What world did you want? What world did you need when you were a child? And we've got to try to aim to create that. And
it's just chipping away at it. If we just give up, if everybody gives up, it'll never happen, will it?
Absolutely.
Even if you do, just save one.
Yeah.
And that's what I plan to do. And you know what? My story has had such an impact. I have had so many people inside the cult and outside the cult reach out to me and say, like, me too, it happened to me.
Amazing.
And just speaking your truth and speaking your story can have literally a ripple effect across so many platforms that you didn't even think would happen. I didn't think that anyone from inside would contact me and be like, thank you for being so honest. And also for some people, like my behavior as a 18, 19-year-old was ridiculous, but now they know the story, they can see why I behaved like that. And actually, to be gentle with myself, I'm not ashamed of that behavior anymore because I was acting as a severely damaged girl, but that's the girl they still see inside this cult. So we saw some the other day, they were like, oh, there's Abby Jones. I haven't been Abby Jones for 7 years. I got married 7 years ago, but they still see that girl.
They hold on to a lot in there, sadly.
Oh no, they don't. They forgive. They don't even know what forgiveness is, apart from if it's an abuser, and then they do. Jeremy, what do you think in your opinion, is most detrimental to survivors of abuse?
I think it's everything we've nicely covered here, which is the taboo of the topic. The taboo of the topic is stopping society from talking about it. It's stopping major news outlets talking about it. It's stopping even podcasts being open about it in fear of saying the wrong thing or triggering the wrong person. And then that taboo and what that creates is then creating a very unsafe, uninviting environment for people that want to speak out.
Yeah.
And that is definitely one of the I think things that are detrimental for people that have been through an experience like this in their childhood. And that can change, and that can change from us speaking boldly about our stories. I mean, it's phenomenal. People have contacted you just saying, like, I hear you. Thank you so much for talking about like that. And they may never tell their story, but at least they've seen somebody that has told their story and they know it's an option if they ever come around to it. And I do have a lot of people message me asking me like, oh, how did I start what I started? And they'd love to do that as well, but they don't know how to. And my advice is, if you're ever wanting to start something online, let's say, just start with your story, because that's the most powerful tool that you have. It's so powerful. You can't believe how powerful a well-told story is. And you've already got the story. You got all the material, unfortunately. You know, it's a sad thing that you have that story, but I believe it's possible in most circumstances to turn it around and use it for some good, or use it for even your own empowerment as you start to tell your story.
Yeah, and also it's our story. No one can take that away from us. They could take or try to take everything else away, but that they can't, and that's really powerful. In terms of reporting abuse to the authorities, so in this cult, they believe in not. There's a scripture they use around about not taking a brother to the courts of law or something.
Oh, there's something that they use, yeah.
Yeah.
In their eyes, they're higher than that, aren't they? Okay.
Yes.
The law is there because it has to be there, but that doesn't mean that they have to comply, you know.
Right.
Yeah. So what would you say? Sorry, Anne.
In their minds, they're above the law.
Yeah. What would you say to maybe parents of children who watch this podcast in there, or even maybe children that watch this podcast, who are desperately fearful of going to the police because maybe the parents are stopping them or the priests are stopping them? Like, what would you say to them?
My immediate reaction is I want to tell them to report it, but I also don't want to be telling people what they should do with this very sensitive experience that they have. I often try to stay away from like advising people to even speak out, but I do know that the prosecution process can seem very fearful because it's very rare that it's successful, and it's very rare that it's quick, and it's very rare that it's a smooth process. And I know that puts a lot of people off. However, I also have heard many stories where there's been a successful prosecution and it's brought people a lot of release, and it's brought people a lot of healing. And even just attempting to prosecute or letting the authorities know so that person's name is with the authorities is an empowering move for a lot of people, even if they don't get a successful prosecution. So I think for anybody that's listening that's over 18, I don't want to say to you, you should go and prosecute because of XYZ. I'm just saying that there are so many stories out there that it's brought so much to people's lives, so it's worth a consideration. But when we talk about under 18s, I mean, we have laws in this country, or we have procedures and processes, safeguarding procedures and processes. And when I go to a school, if anybody comes to me under the age of 18 and tells me that they're in an abusive situation, I have to report that they are. and I have to go to the safeguarding lead and get that situation sorted out. So
this is completely different to what the Brethren do.
Right.
But they have a safeguarding booklet or something, so to speak.
Do they?
Yes, that's new.
I left.
It's new.
That.
Yeah, I'm going to say within the last 3 years. But it's just a piece of paper.
Right.
It's a tick box that they've got it. And I can say that confidently because I know of children that were abused by older children in the local Brethren school, and nothing was sorted. No one really got involved. The child that abused the other child still went to school with the abused children. They were still allowed around other children. And even they were put on the same school bus together to do the school journey together. The whole thing was covered up. And that child that was abused is suffering so much because he has been completely let down by their tick box exercise. Like, I remember they did this thing where they got all the parents in and spoke about things like this. I don't think it even registered because they're so dense about subjects like this. Yeah.
So they're trying to. I watched a short clip about Rishi Sunak trying to make it law that if anyone ever discloses to you under the age of 18, then you have to report it.
Yeah, that was after the independent child sexual abuse
inquiry, wasn't it? Yeah. I don't follow every strand of this subject, so I don't know whatever happened with that. But I think it's something similar to what happened in these football clubs where everyone knew what was going on with those young boys, and nobody ever did anything about it. And they're trying to eliminate that from going on, making it law that if a minor is being abused and you know about it, you have to report it, because that's not law at the moment.
Else you'll be prosecuted, right?
Yes.
If you know about it. And that kind of worries me a little bit because I know of so many cases of child sexual abuse within that cult. You know, I should really be reporting it to the police. And it's so difficult to know what to do in these circumstances because I know that the children will literally be mentally tortured. If I go to the police and disclose it,
it's you're never going to be able to cover all bases either, because when you start talking about people being prosecuted for not reporting abuse, there's going to be a number of children that are now never going to say anything to anyone, because if they go and tell anybody about the abuse that they're going through, then their abuser, who could be a family member, is now going to definitely go to prison or be in trouble. And so you can never actually cover every base. I spoke about this with my school visits because I was wondering whether I needed to say at the start of my presentation, just to let everybody in this room know that if anybody comes to me with a situation that you're currently in, I am obliged to go and speak with somebody, because I don't want any young kid coming to me thinking, I just want to tell him, but I don't want anyone else to know, because telling me is their first step, right? They've never told anyone else, but then they come and tell me and I'm like, I'm sorry, I've got to go and tell your teacher now. And they're like, well, I didn't know that was you can never cover every base. And so that obligation or that law that's coming in is going to keep a few children silent. But I mean, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, we need to make some kind of move here. And what we want to do is stop the adults that don't tell. What we want to do is tell the adults or make it law of what you do if you receive a disclosure.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of adults, like priests and high up people, that know about someone being sexually abused and they've covered it up. It would blow my mind if I actually knew. Like, I know of a few of, a good number of people in my area that have been abused, and it's all been covered. Like, if I knew about the rest of I don't think I'd actually want to know. I think it'd actually be quite a scary figure.
If everybody who has ever been abused sexually, like direct contact, let's say, right? Direct physical contact. So we're not even talking about being approached online as an example, because we'll call that non-contact just for this discussion. If everybody that's ever had direct contact, sexual abuse as a minor, so under the age of 16 in this country, if tomorrow morning they all went to the police, nobody, I mean, there'd be queues going around the town. Like, people don't realize how often this has happened, whether that be within the family, whether that be within friendship circles, whether that be older cousins, whether that be granddads, uncles, family friends, dads, stepdads. Like, it is astronomical. It's astronomical. And maybe if, as we continue to move forward and more people speak out, which I'm guessing the numbers are just rising, and more people speak about it in explicit terms, when we talk about that 5-year-old girl doing things with her dad because she thinks she's involved in a game, when we think about that 11-year-old boy doing things with his football coach because he thinks that's how he's going to get on the team, when we start actually explaining it like that and not just saying child sexual abuse, because, I mean, what does that really mean? That doesn't give anyone a vision of anything. It's actually, of course, we got to term it in some way, but we just hide behind that term, right? If we start, as we continue speaking about it in explicit ways, and we talk about masturbation, and we talk about fondling, and we talk about oral sex, and we talk about penetration, when you start thinking about those words and you start thinking about children, then people start taking it seriously. And I hope in our lifetime we're going to see actually people start saying enough is enough. So we saw the Me Too movement. I wasn't really doing this work. I was still engineering during the Me Too movement, so I didn't study it like I would study it now. But I mean, that was a worldwide thing, right? And that brought so much awareness to sexual assault and sexual abuse. Now, can we create something like that for children? Maybe we can, and maybe we will get everybody watching that. So the new film, Sound of Freedom, you seen the trailers for that or anything?
I haven't, no.
Okay, so they've just released it in the US. It came out on the 4th of July. It's called Sound of Freedom. It's a narrative piece. It's a film. And you can check out, some people have started interviewing the directors of it. It's about child trafficking. And the guy that wrote it, or the guy that's involved in its production, has done like 10, 15 years out on the front lines with child trafficking, like overseas, etc. And not every cinema is showing it over in the US, only select few. And they thought it was going to be a flop because they just thought nobody's going to want to engage with this topic. It's too dark for audience. But it was released on the same, now don't quote me on this, but I read an article yesterday, but it was released on the same day as Indiana Jones's new film, and it's beat them in the box office. So actually there's a huge interest. So I was assuming it was going to come to the UK, but my friend said nothing's coming to the UK yet. But I hope if it makes enough noise and it makes enough money over in the US, then of course it's going to come to the UK, and then we can start getting people's eyes on these topics. And I'm really pleased about that. It just feels like a breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to get this in front of people, no matter if it's in a film,
yes,
or if it's us blowing our foghorns about it.
And maybe no, definitely, I truly believe we need every style, right? We need every style of conversation. We need film, we need podcasts, we need adverts, we need articles, we need blogs, because everybody consumes content in different ways, right? Here's some more. We need music. We need songs about it. We need the big players. We need the big artists talking about, because for sure, many of them have been abused. The statistic doesn't avoid certain groups of people. So music artists will have been sexually abused as well. When they start making songs about it, the ones with millions of followers, like selling millions of records, then we get somewhere. I'll tell you another stage that I actually just recorded a new podcast about was comedy. Right. So I just reviewed a video on my latest podcast, which is coming out hopefully tomorrow, about a guy who in England called Johnny, forget his surname, and he's done a comedy set on his story. And the first time I saw that was a couple of years ago, and I wasn't sure about it because the jokes are like, they're not laugh out loud for me. However, he talks in his documentary about receiving hundreds of messages from people saying, "Oh, you just brought that to me in a way that I could consume, it wasn't too dark. Like, it's just another style, whether we like it or not, it's just another style. And if we can have a million styles talking about this in a million ways, then we can reach people that wouldn't usually engage with this topic."
Yeah. And therefore it won't be taboo.
Right.
We got to get rid of that, haven't we?
Because we need to get outside of the survivor circles.
Yeah.
Like I can make content for the survivors forever, right? And do really well at that and inspire lots of people. But I want to get outside of the survivor circles. I want to reach that mother and that father that have never really considered this before. Right? I want to reach that doctor that's never really thought about this before. I want to reach that football coach that never really thought about this before. They know that it happens, but they've never really thought about it. I want to reach those people for them to be like, "Oh, I knew that always happened, but my goodness, I've got an 8-year-old son and I'm going to have a conversation with him tomorrow."
Yeah.
That's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of getting to the root of it, isn't it?
Yeah. Before it happens.
Right.
And people like teachers. So I don't I do have it's complicated with teachers because I was assaulted by a teacher at one school, Sydney, which is the cult like golden school. It's right under the leader, Bruce Hales, and every other school in the whole world looks to that school. So any children that are being abused by their teachers, what can they do in that circumstance? Because they'd be too ashamed to go to their parents, I suppose. In the cult, I'm thinking. So what other avenues are there in the UK of people that you can speak to in confidence?
So there are fantastic charities out there with anonymous phone lines. So you can do a Google search, use a few keywords, check out some websites, find one that you relate to. Yes, please, Anne.
Just use a Google search. Sadly, the brethren can't use Google. So for the benefit of hopefully some of them listening to this, could you name some of those?
So I don't usually name charities because I haven't proofread them, but let's go for this, right? So you could start with the NSPCC.
Yeah.
You could start with Bernardo's. You could start with Lucy Faithful Foundation. So I know that there's 3. So I know that they have anonymous phone lines where you can ring and they will respect your anonymity. I don't know what the correct term is. And you can just chat to somebody and find out where you can go from there. And I would say that is a great avenue for anybody within the cult that is listening to this to go and at least seek some advice from a professional trained person.
Even as a child, you're talking about,
yes. Yes.
Yeah, because it's I didn't actually know who to go to when that happened to me, because if I went to the head teacher, she'd go to the CEOs, and then the CEOs would just close it all down because the CEOs are brethren. I couldn't go to my parents because that's a whole nother story. I couldn't go to the auntie that I was living with because I don't think she'd have done anything about it. And I just felt completely stuck. So it was only until I was 22. Yeah, 22, when I told a guy in Australia that was sort of over my case. I was a case. And I don't actually know if he ever did anything about it, but I'm going through the process of reporting it all at the moment. But if I'd have been able to pick up the phone to someone that I knew I could trust, then I would have done.
And so this may be a great avenue for some of your listeners, because it's an independent person that you're going to be talking to from an independent organization that's outside of your cult, and is going to treat you with professional opinion. So
and it doesn't even matter if you're not sure if it's sexual abuse. It could be any type of abuse. These people are there to talk to you as a child. They get all sorts coming to them.
Yeah, 100%.
So don't be scared. Don't think it has to be something massive.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them don't even know what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, you could even call the Samaritans, right? You could even call the Samaritans. It's another one. They're not sexual abuse specific, but they deal with all sorts of cases. So,
yeah, that's really good what you say, Anne, because I've spoken to a lot of survivors still within there, and these are grown adults, and they've only known recently what terms like paedophile means, what rape means, what sexual abuse means, what, all these terms actually mean. They've never even heard the word, because the education isn't there. So they've got all these safeguarding things at school. But if the children don't know actually what's happening to them, like I didn't, I had no idea. I thought I was his special kid and the one that got all the attention in this way. So I was really lucky. No, this was sexual abuse.
I mean, sorry, go on.
No, I didn't know that that's what it was.
Yeah, I mean, even as a 44-year-old that left 10 years ago, 10.5 years ago, when I left, I didn't, like I say, marital rape and coercive control isn't a word that I ever knew. Sexual abuse, not even the word abuse particularly. The only time we would have maybe seen those was if we were naughty, reading the papers and reading the juicy bits of the newspaper. You might have read about rape, but that was something that happened outside of our community. That wasn't, so that I just hope that those that get the chance to listen to this open their minds to anything that could be going on that they're not sure about, and they can still go to these people. Nobody's going to harm you.
Yeah. What would you say to to parents, potential parents of children that have been abused within the cult? What would you encourage them to do for their children instead of going about the generic way of sweeping it under the carpet and pretend it never happened?
I would say to those parents, please get your children to safety as soon as possible, because what's going on with them is going to affect them on a very deep level. Their personality, their behavioral traits as they get older, their flashbacks, the way that they carry out their life. So please push aside all of the things that you've been programmed to think, or how to deal with these situations, brushing it under the carpet. You're brushing it under the carpet for this moment, but actually all you're doing is handing it to your child to handle themselves as they grow into an adult. It's never going to go away. And I hope that your primary concern is their well-being. So please help them.
Yeah. It's brilliant. Do you have any more questions, Anne?
No, I think it's been brilliant. Just having, another set of eyes on it, where we've come from. It's such a weird place. And
That's an understatement.
but it's just good to hear, an outsider, if you like, perspective on the whole thing and how rampant it is everywhere, and how important it is to get away from this taboo and to try and get to the root of the problem.
Yeah. When my husband and I said to the priest that we were leaving the brethren, he turned round to me and he said, "You realise that your child is more likely to be sexually abused outside the brethren than inside." And I just thought, you naive little twat. Like, the difference outside here is, yes, it happens, but yes, it's dealt with in the right way most of the time. And also, I've lost my train of thought because I was so angry.
But I don't know what the statistics are in close communities like this, but I imagine it's a high percentage in a close community like that. You know, that you're so on top of each other. You know, you're so, like in Northern Ireland, there was 700 congregation in the whole of Ireland. That's such a small community where you're constantly, and the kids are not just going to school together, then they're going to meetings daily together. Then it's got to be quite a high percentage, I would imagine. And
you're not allowed to have to do with anyone outside.
No.
So that is your life.
That is your life. It's So to think that it's less healthy in the free world, if you like, very naive.
Yeah, I remembered what I was saying. The other difference is that outside here, you can choose to not have to do with a paedophile. Inside there are paedophiles that have not been convicted, and you are expected to go to the SUP meetings with them. You're expected to go to the meetings with them. You're expected to have them in your house for dinner. Outside here, like, they're scum. No one will have to do with them apart from if the abuser has manipulated them as well. So I just wanted to discredit that whole statement, because that's what they'll be telling people inside, and it's bullshit.
Yeah. Thank you, Abi.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
Not only to come on our podcast, but also your time spent in trying to bring awareness to this horrific crime against children, and also to break this taboo of sexual abuse. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the conversation. Yep, no problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you are in a high-demand religious group and need help, please go to oliveleaf.network. To share your story or be a guest on the show, email info.getalife@proton.me. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to Get a Life, and comment.